meditate, and follow the wise. Interesting. If you didn't hear that and you want to make sense of the rest of this, it's online. Okay. So this week we'll consider the last 3 steps in the road. They're called accept mindfulness as a way of life, embrace change, live in the moment. Again, I'm offering some ideas for you to consider. But I'd like to begin by suggesting a different way to listen. Rather than listening with your intellectual mind, how about seeing if you can open up the wisdom center that resides in the solar plexus region of the body and breathe into that place in the body. Next, simply invite Spirit to bring you the light of wisdom. The light of wisdom is the ability to recognize and trust your own inner resonance. See if by breathing into the wisdom center and invoking the source of all wisdom, you can get a very clear awareness of which of these ideas is meant especially for you in this moment. Right? So I can feel you. There's the quiet. So okay, the stage is set. The next step we're going to talk about is accept mindfulness as a way of life. But I want to slow down right here too, because I want to look at those words. That word accept. When we accept something, we let it in. There is no resistance, no doubt. When FedEx delivers a package to your door, and after you check to make sure it has your name on it, then you could reject it. Maybe you don't like the person who sent it. Maybe you're afraid the package contains something dangerous. Or you can accept it and bring it into your house. You're curious and a bit excited. A gift has arrived. A gift you cannot receive unless you first accept it. And then there's this phrase, a way of life. We say it in our principles. Not a theory to read about or understand intellectually. And I thought how to describe this idea, and the poem, beautiful poem, The Road Not Taken, came to me from Robert Frost. And parts of it, I've extracted some parts, but it says this. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could see, and then chose the other, just as fair, but perhaps having a better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. I thought to keep the first road for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted I should ever come back. Do you hear the moment of indecision? And then the commitment and the risk. This is sort of what it means to accept mindfulness as a way of life. The Buddhist nun who taught me meditation said a couple of things about mindfulness that I've always remembered. She described it as the quality of knowing what you're doing while you're doing it. And she went on to say that mindfulness makes life itself a meditation, which was very useful to me since my method up until then was a cycle of making messes, praying for help, getting help, and then circling back to clean up the damage. Anybody know that? Right. But by the time the reason probably I was in meditation class with a Buddhist nun was because that method had become rather tedious and tiring. When we're living mindfully everyday experiences, even just breathing in and breathing out, become a delight. Sensing the body's mysterious and wonderful life force makes us feel safe and happy. It's miraculous. Mindfulness helps us to feel more deeply in general, to feel our own suffering and that of others, to tune into our own joy and that in others also. And when we tune into the suffering within ourselves and with others, we now have the opportunity to transform it. And we transform it through our thought, right? Through our uplifting thoughts. And when we tune in with joy, it's like life takes on what which was once monochrome becomes filled with color. I think of meditation and mindfulness as a dynamic duo. The 30 minutes of meditation in the morning and evening help tame the obsessive thinking that causes us to remain hooked, restless, and a little tense. In total relaxation, we are available for revelations from Source, which I gratefully think of as divine downloads, which is what gets me here every week. Mindfulness reduces our susceptibility to distractions. It is the practice of meeting each and every experience with an attitude of openness and freshness. Some Buddhist teachers call this beginner's mind. A good example came up in class Thursday, I think it was this week. We were talking about discernment, which is the aspect of our wisdom faculty that allows us to see beyond the appearances of things. For example, through discernment, we can see beyond someone's persona and sense who he or she really is. We talked about how a lot of us in Unity tend to look out at the world and at people through rose-colored glasses. And that sometimes we've been hurt because we opened ourselves to people we should not have. It came up for me to remember my mother calling me naive all the time. And because that had a critical tone to it, I grew up thinking that naivete was one of my shortcomings. But in the class, someone offered a different perspective, which often happens. She said, well, I don't know. I'd rather be naive. I'd rather trust and get hurt than walk around cynical and skeptical all the time. What she was describing was beginner's mind. Free of focus on past problems and poor choices, we come to each new relationship and situation as though experiencing it for the first time. We expect the good because we've earned the quality of resilience through this journey called life. We're no longer so afraid of getting hurt or disappointed because we know these feelings come, and if we accept them and love them, also go. So I think that's a good theme for our discussion. I don't know if you all will like it after church today. Skepticism versus naivete. Something to think about. Through mindfulness, we can free ourselves from obsessive craving and the continual meaning-making of our restless minds. Because these are habits that make us prisoners of the past. The first thing our minds do in face of a new experience is to go on a data search for something similar and then link them up. If there's no interruption to this rat wheel, one story builds upon another until the next similar event unleashes a hurricane-sized crisis. I remember Mary Morrissey saying to us in one of her classes, some people live 7 days in a week. Others live 1 day 7 times. Sometimes our minds also can churn out scenarios of the future, which of course gives rise to worry. Interestingly, the pictures that arise often come out of experiences and expectation that the future is going to be just like the past. A thought that I gotta say, unless it's interrupted, could very likely be the case. Of course, we're also capable of using the power of imagination to visualize the future we desire. A lot of work here with vision boards and things like that, you know. And they do help us get in touch with what we really want. But guess what? Holding on to that ideal with a clenched fist can make it hard to see the abundance that's right here in front of our faces now. We can live always in the future. I'll be happy when X, Y, and Z, right? Besides, I think we human beings generally have a tendency to think too small, don't you? To dream too small. It's a simple but not easy thing to live mindfully, especially in this day of multitasking and ceaseless stimulation. Imagine the peacefulness of washing the dishes mindfully, feeling the warm water run over your hands on a cool night, pausing to appreciate the gleam of a clean plate, noticing how beautiful the sudsy bubbles are, holding each dish in a way that speaks of its value, for it is an everyday, useful, wonderful thing. Mindfulness in relationships can totally transform them. It's so easy to judge others, to analyze and assess, not for me, but maybe for you. It may be because our primitive brains were designed for threat assessment. You think about the way a bear comes out of the cave after he's been hibernating and he's scanning, looking for trouble. And while this may be helpful for a bear, it may be helpful in the White House war room, it's usually not particularly helpful with family and friends. Mindfulness is judgment-free. It teaches us to take in what someone is saying with no need to evaluate it and no need to do anything about it. Eric Butterworth is famous for saying about the life events and people, including ourselves, don't try to set it right, do what? See it right. Mindfulness allows us to see rightly. Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh says it lays the groundwork for the development of compassion. Another discussion, got a lot out of that class on wisdom, another discussion from the wisdom class was on how a lot of us have a sort of built-in aversion to silence. There seems to be a low-level fear of allowing space in conversations. Like there's some burden there to respond or react, to advise or to help immediately. Too bad. Because, as Fillmore taught, wisdom is a gift that comes from Source, and it comes out of the stillness and the spaciousness, and it comes when we ask for it, and rarely when we're in the midst of a reaction. Don't you think it would make a great conversation with a loved one to consider new ways of having a conversation? We could consider a way that involves more listening than talking. Ladies, are you with me? Let's see what happens with that. A way that's perhaps gentler and calmer. Perhaps we could arrive at an agreement about space and silence so that it doesn't feel threatening. Just the opposite, in fact. Where it feels like relaxation. And we can take a breath. What would that be like? Lovely, I think. Our love for one another is the presence and activity of the Holy Spirit. What if in a second or two of silence we were to intentionally invoke this holy presence and then speak or settle down to listen? The Buddha says that the moment there is fear, anger, resentment, frustration, even sadness, mindfulness is gone. because we become attached. And it happens to everyone. Ego takes over. And what it really is a call for space. Different approach. I always try harder when that happens. It's an interesting idea to try less. Right. So that is the fourth rule for happiness. Accept mindfulness as a way of living. The next rule is embrace change. Change is constant, right? Everything in life changes. Sometimes so slowly we barely notice it, and sometimes so quickly we feel shell-shocked. The Buddha said that the biggest mistake people make is that they think they have time, even though the passage of time is unmistakable. Have you ever looked in the mirror one morning and suddenly wondered, who is that old person? And how did she get in here? Yeah, me too. It's not just the body that does that, though. It's the mind as well. Lately, I find myself thinking a lot more about the hereafter. Like when I walk into a room and just stand there asking myself, what am I hereafter? It's humbling, right? It's really Every moment contains the potential for change. We know this is true for everyone, and yet we sometimes resist. And this resistance, more than the change itself, causes us a lot of discomfort and even some pretty weird behavior. One man I know became so anxious, he went to the psychiatrist looking for an answer. And he walks into the office and he says, Doc, it's so odd. Every time I see nickels, dimes, and pennies, I have a panic attack. What can my problem be? Oh, that's easy, the doc answers. You're just afraid of change. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. Think about family of origin for a moment. Each member of a family has an often unstated role to play. Expectations have arisen around that role. So when one member steps out of that box, the parent leaves, the child gets in trouble or grows up and leaves, there is a lot of upset. Change upsets that proverbial cart, apple cart. Resistance in the form of anger or resentment is a literal breeding ground for suffering. The future well-being of the family can be threatened. On the other hand, if each person were able to open up to new possibilities that the change offers, the future of the family may be more promising than ever. When I left Greensboro to come here, you all have heard this ad nauseum, but no details. My family chose the path of resistance. There was a lot of unhealthy acting out. Thank goodness for the mental health hotline. Do you know about it? All you have to do is dial the number, and you get a recording that says, "Welcome to the mental health hotline. We're here for you." To help us direct your call, please choose from the following menu. If you are obsessive compulsive, please press 1 repeatedly. If you are codependent, please ask someone else. If you have multiple personality disorder, please press 3, 4, 5. I couldn't resist this. If you are paranoid, we know who you are and what you want. Please stay on the line so we can trace this call. If you are delusional, press 7 and your call will be transferred to the mothership. If you are schizophrenic, listen carefully and a small voice will tell you what number to press. If you are depressed, it doesn't matter which number you press, no one will answer. Do you see the law? Finally, if you have low self-esteem hang up as all our operators are too busy to talk to us. Funny, yes, and not. If we believe in the law of attraction, right, we can see how it could possibly be that we need those kinds of situations out of the way we're thinking and feeling. Maybe not exactly like that.
Close.
So yeah, change can feel scary and upsetting. But there's also a sense of freedom that's possible in the face of uncertainty. There could be a sort of invitation to experience life more fully. When we begin to live life on its terms, in other words, when we're willing to release ourselves from that prison of our mind, life really becomes beautiful. And I think one of the reasons it's so beautiful is that everything changes. Everything is so transient and so momentary. It's everything. Sepp arrived on Friday night with a lovely bouquet of roses for me. They're just jealous, Sepp, don't they?
That's true.
I treasure those flowers in no small part because I know they will soon be gone. Do you know what I mean? There's something about that momentariness. There's an old proverb about the ox and the unicorn. The ox is a strong beast of burden. It is very useful for getting things done. So you have a thought in your mind or a dream about how life should be, and you tap into that inner ox to make it happen. But while you're plodding on down the road with your eyes fixed on your prize, it could be wise to watch for the unicorn, which may appear in your peripheral vision. The unicorn is a rather misty image, not sure and strong like the ox. It doesn't come with certainty or speak with logic. It is a call to turn left when the ox wants to go straight. The Buddha says, the wise turn left. So that's the fifth rule. Embrace change. And the final rule then is related to that, and it's live in the moment. And it's interesting what this turns out to be about. It's about the art of concentration. Concentration is born out of mindfulness. It's the power to break through and burn away the afflictions of the mind that cause us to suffer so that joy can't enter in. But you know, it takes concentration to live in the present moment. When we're able to concentrate, in other words, choose what to hold our attention on, we recapture a lot of energy. It's like we're plugging our energy leaks. Because we don't get emotionally carried away by memories of the past or suffering or fears about the future. We dwell stably in the present and the whole world opens itself to us in this moment. The power of concentration can be developed through the habit of focusing on the breath, in the moment, even for a moment. I'm sure you'll agree that nothing is more life-giving than breath. When we intentionally give our attention to the breath, energy pours into the body and mind and allows happiness to arise easily and naturally. Let's just pause for a moment and consider. Something upsetting has happened in your life, and you can't seem to get it off your mind. It just runs and runs and runs and runs. Try this experiment. If you'll take 2 minutes of just noticing and following the breath, which we'll practice in meditation, I bet you'll notice that that obsessiveness clears. You haven't forgotten anything, but somehow the priorities have shifted in your mind. Another example, because we're now mindful, okay, we've been through that, we may notice tension in our bodies. And we may want very much to release it, but we just can't seem to do it. We may not even know that something, that craving or that grudge, is there, causing the tension. We may know that something is there that's an obstacle to our happiness, but we get hooked anyway. We're like fish who, having been caught before, knows there's a hook inside the bait, but still keeps biting down on it. We get caught by situations that really are not worthy of our concern, and we let them carry us away. It's okay. It's like Will Rogers is famous for saying, if you don't learn from your mistake, what's the point of making them? In these moments, we can call on the power of concentration and return attention to the breath. Isn't the first thing you say to someone who's having an anxiety attack or has suffered a trauma, isn't the first thing you say to them, breathe? Yeah, because it's really a miracle. So the more intentional we are in this practice of using the breath to return to the moment, and what I'm amazed is, because when I was learning meditation, I was overwhelmed because I thought, gee, I'm supposed to be able to do this for 45 minutes or whatever it is. Try it for 2 and see what happens. In the past, we probably suffered from one thing or another, but we've learned and we've grown, and so now when we're triggered by something, we can use the power of concentration to sit still and not be swept away, which, though it sounds simple, is no small matter. Pema Chodron, in her book, The Things That Scare Us, says, spiritual growth depends on our ability to sit still. It is the true power, one that we ought to rejoice in because it's nothing less than the power to transform suffering into happiness. The Buddha says, when you dig a well, there is no sign of water until you reach it. But remove the rocks and the water will flow. Concentration gives us the ability to clear the debris one breath at a time. So these are the 6 steps along the road to happiness. Simplify. Meditate. Follow the wise. Accept mindfulness as a way of life. Embrace change. And live in the present moment. These ideas are powerful because they point to a thorough engagement with a lived reality rather than an imagined mental reality. Through engagement with ourselves, the world, and other people just as we are, we invite a sort of transcendent happiness that abides just no matter what, in the midst of whatever twists and turns there are. Equanimity, that's my 2 favorite words. I got 3. Resilience, which we talked about before. Equanimity is a deep sense of well-being and balance and happiness, and it is attainable. I think these practices could really help us. And I'll leave you with one more piece of wisdom from the Buddha. The Buddha said, in the end, only 3 things matter. How much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of the things that were not meant for you. Sounds good to me. God bless you.
Amen.